Bloomberg says something just happened. Something very important. Something that changes everything and in fact signifies that the United States has in fact reached a tipping point. It has gotten to that point in history where we'll all point back and say, remember that day? Remember that year? That is when everything changed. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the channel. I'm the Electric Viking. Great to see you. Congratulations, United States. You're way behind Europe. You're way behind China. You're way ahead of Australia. But you know what? It's not really a race, is it? This is about getting to the finish line. As long as we get there, that's what matters the most. Bloomberg says the US has hit an electric car tipping point. The tipping point sounds like, well, it doesn't sound like all that much, is it? The word tipping point. It's like, oh yeah, okay, tipping point. But actually, it's extremely significant. Recently, Consumer Reports found that more and more Americans are considering buying an EV, or leasing an EV as well. In its latest survey, 15% of drivers who responded said their very next car would definitely be an EV. They weren't considering anything else. However, now Clean Technica says that Bloomberg is telling its subscribers that electric cars have passed a critical tipping point in the US and that a quarter of all new cars sold in America will be electric by 2025, several years earlier than expected. Now, personally, I think this is ridiculous. I think they're saying, oh wow, you're going to hit more than 25% of all cars sold will be EVs in 2025, and that's somehow meaning we're years ahead of where Bloomberg was saying you guys in the US would be. It doesn't add up. It just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, what part of the fact that you guys in the US have like 5 million pre-orders for electric cars doesn't compute? 5 million. I mean, that's nearly half of America's yearly vehicle sales. In other words, if companies could actually provide electric cars right now, if they could provide all the demand, the pent-up demand there is right now in the US, well, not all of it, but at least the orders that are in place right now, that would be half of America's entire car market. So to say that it's going to take 3 years to get to 25%, in my view, is actually really a pretty conservative number. I think we'll get to 25% in 2024. And I know that sounds aggressive, but that's what I think will happen. The S-curve. In the tech world, people like to talk about the S-curve, and I've talked about it on this channel on a number of different occasions. It's quite an interesting concept. It's a graphical symbol that predicts when new technology will go mainstream. And people use it because it's worked. It's often predicted pretty accurately when things like smartphones would take over from the old ancient, analog-y type phones we used to have. The idea is that once a new thing hits 5% market penetration, the rate of acceptance of that product or the rate of demand for that product goes up exponentially before falling off at the end. So we're going to have like some laggards at the end. When we get to that 95% penetration rate of electric vehicles, we're going to have people who are going to go, no, I'm not getting one of those. I like me old pickup. That's all right. As long as they're not a big percentage, which I don't think they will be, it doesn't really matter if only a few percent of people want to hold on to the past. There's always going to be those who are sentimental. There's always going to be those people who absolutely abhor change of any kind. Any kind of change, they hate it. Whether that's moving house, changing jobs, changing anything, changing decor in their home, changing paint colors. They just don't want to change. Those people exist. They will always continue to exist. There's still a few people getting around with 20-year-old Ericsson and Nokia phones, right? Blackberries. They probably will for the next 20 years, as long as those things continue to work. CBS News says that the United States is the most recent addition to a growing list of nations where fully electric cars make up 5% of new vehicle sales. That's a threshold that opens the gate to mass adoption based on the latest tipping point, following 18 other countries. So, yeah, you're 19th in the world. You'll get there. You'll rise up the list. Don't worry, guys in the US, you'll get there. If prior trends continue, a quarter of new car sales could be electric by the end of 2025. When it comes to electric cars, 5% seems to be the magic number at which the early adopters are joined by most of the rest of the country and their population. Bloomberg found the scenario played out in Norway after its first 5% quarter in 2013. Isn't that crazy to think Norway's at 5% in 2013 and they're at 90% now, only 9 years later? China followed suit. They hit 5% in 2018. They're nearly at 30% now. South Korea last year, then Canada, Australia, and Spain are among the other major car markets nearing the tipping point this year. I do think there's a lot of Australians want an electric car. A lot of them are moaning and whining. Guys, stop moaning and whining. It doesn't help. And it becomes like a disease. It's an illness. Unfortunately, Australians have the whining disease, the moaning disease. It's a thing here in Australia. It's become part of our culture. We criticize people in the UK. We call them whinging pomps, but we do exactly the same thing. The truth is, though, I do understand why some of you guys are doing this. You're whining and moaning because you want a better product, and I understand that. You want electric cars. I think Australia would probably hit around 20% of all car sales as electric if those cars were actually available. And obviously that's the key, isn't it? Availability. That's going to drastically change, though, isn't it? Over the next few years, China is seeking to swamp the Australian car market with affordably priced EVs. Australians are saying, yes, bring them, please. We want them. So clearly, the numbers will change very quickly. Every country that has crossed the mark of 5% adoption has a program of federal incentives and pollution rules in place. That goes for the US too. The Australia, though, here we don't have pollution rules and we haven't yet crossed 5%. So a little thing there worth considering. With the White House last year calling for EVs to make up half of new cars by 2030, including hybrids, unfortunately, things are starting to change in the US. The US should hit that target several years ahead of schedule, says Bloomberg. That's good news as well. Global efforts to get rid of the internal combustion engine have weakened the historically tight relationship between GDP growth rates and demand for crude oil, said Ed Morse, Citigroup's global head of commodity research. He told CBS, "We're quite confident in our view that China has peaked in terms of diesel demand and is peaking in terms of gas demand." Morse told CBS Money Watch last week, citing China's high proportion of electric cars or hybrids. The world's appetite for oil will peak by the end of the decade. Now, obviously, we can't say for sure how this is going to play out over this decade. But we do know if historical trends continue, which pretty closely follow technological S-curve adoption rates, what that means is we have hit the tipping point. Now, some of you might have read the book that I've talked about on this channel quite often called The Tipping Point, written by Malcolm Gladwell, an English-born Canadian journalist. Now, it was first published in the year 2000, and Gladwell defines a tipping point as the moment of critical mass, the threshold, the boiling point. Gladwell states this: ideas and products and messages and behaviors spread like viruses do. The electric car virus is here. It's spreading and it's strong. Let's keep it up. Thank you for watching.